Welcome back. Well, all good things must come to an end, and it's time to wrap up our class by talking about where qualitative research is going in the year to come. And if you somehow found these videos through YouTube, my name is Sean Jordan. I'm a professional marketing researcher, and this is the first part of our seventh and final lecture series for a class on qualitative research for marketing researchers at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville for the Master of Marketing Research or MMR program. Whew. In our previous lecture series, we talked about how qualitative research is like a light in the darkness, helping to define and make sense of the shapes and shadows we see off in the distance. We also talked about how there are four basic applications of qualitative research: exploration, deep dives, idea generation, and testing. We covered four qualitative methods: observational research, individual in-depth interviewing, ethnography, and focus groups. We've talked about qualitative data analysis and categorization and coding, both in an abstract manner and with some how-to videos providing a look at some different techniques. And of course, we talked about reporting and presenting those data and how we can use data visualizations, storytelling techniques, and different levels of reporting to suit the needs of our research audience. So one key theme in everything we've discussed is that we always want to stay true to our data and approach our research utilizing the scientific method. And what could be more science-based than science fiction? Whoa, the future's here, right? Well, maybe if you're someone like me who grew up in an era where virtual reality really was science fiction, but virtual reality has actually been around in a consumer grade fashion for many years, to the point that even mobile phones have gone through a cycle of adoption and abandonment with it. And though it's primarily being used today for video games, amusement rides, and edutainment style experiences, the technology definitely has some cool applications for the future, which we'll talk about later on in this series. But I wanted to start by talking about VR because it and its cousin augmented reality, or AR, are two examples of technologies that still sound very futuristic and cutting edge when they're applied to a marketing research context, and which are part of a group of what I'd classify as exotic research methods. And often, what we think of as exotic today is destined to become incredibly familiar as it reaches a wider level of adoption. And just to show you how quickly this can happen, when I was in the SIU EMR program back in 2008 through 2009, Facebook was still a pretty new thing a lot of people hadn't heard of, and it was primarily being used by students, not by older people. Photographs were still being taken on standalone cameras, and the Apple iPhone was still so new and so exciting that people would line up for days ahead of release dates just to get one. In the world of research, online surveys were still a fairly exotic technology, and nobody was seriously considering things like live webcam interviews for broad consumer populations because the technology just wasn't reliable enough. There was only a little over this was all only a little over a decade ago. And as of the time I'm recording this video, we're all so used to very different norms that these things seem foreign to us. Smartphones are ubiquitous now, so is Facebook. You have to try really hard not to get online surveys now, and everyone's so used to webcams, thanks in part to the COVID-19 pandemic, that the common complaint today is that we'd all like to see less of each other through online video, not more. But by the same token, let's think about a lot of other promising technologies that exist, but which haven't really taken off. One thing that I would point to are NFC and RFID tags, which were both supposed to revolutionize shopping and inventory management and eliminate cashiers, but which have yet to do so. QR codes were supposed to open us up to a future of augmented reality information, but today they're used for little more than launching a web page URL with an optical device like a scanner or a camera. Smartwatches were supposed to change the world and how we interact with one another, and instead they're mostly just a fitness accessory with some light opportunity for sending messages and listening to media. And my favorite piece of would-be technology, the smart refrigerator, has been talked about for decades as a game changer for grocery store runs and household food management. But so far, all anyone's really figured out regarding smart refrigerators is that you can put a touch screen on the front for people to do the things that they're already doing on their phones, but slower and with more expensive components. Blah. So I want to acknowledge right away that some of what we talk about in this series is going to sound old-fashioned after a few years, and I also want to acknowledge that a lot of it is never going to turn into a serious approach for collecting qualitative data, and that's okay. What I'm mainly concerned about is helping you know enough to be able to recognize these technologies when they come your way. And I also want to ensure you have a bigger picture perspective in mind so that when you see pictures like this one of this VR guy looking not so cool as he explores a virtual world that's undoubtedly very cool to his eyes, you'll have some context for knowing whether or not what you're seeing through your own eyes is truly the next big thing or probably not. So let's begin by understanding that the reality of things right now is that qualitative research is converging with quantitative research in many ways through hybrid approaches, where both are used in the same study, and through tandem approaches, where they're used back to back. As I mentioned earlier on in the series, as I talked about Superman and Batman, qual and quant work best together when they're on the same team. And many researchers have found that pairing surveys with interviews, focus groups, or online observational methods that utilize content analysis is a pretty reliable way to enhance the overall quality of their data. But whereas quant went through a big change back in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s as statisticians and researchers figured out ways to take laborious statistical techniques and speed them up with computerization and automation, qual has proven a much more difficult area to improve because so many of its strengths rely upon human interpretation. Many of the tools that are available today, transcription software, CACDAS software, online qualitative platforms, and the like, are able to offer some improvements, but they're not breakthroughs that effectively change the way qualitative research needs to be done. In fact, the greatest demand among many qualitative researchers is not for help in collecting or compiling data, but help in analyzing voluminous amounts of data. And machine learning and AI tools aren't anywhere near the level of capability required to do that just yet. Even when they are, chances are good that they, like so many other automated tools, will be biased heavily towards certain sets of assumptions that don't work in every context. While we might have something a bit more exciting in a decade or two, I suspect a lot of qualitative data analysis is going to continue to be handled by human beings using software tools. What I foresee instead over the next decade or two is an evolution of methods used for qualitative research to reduce the amount of human interaction needed, and instead to focus on collecting more robust and detailed forms of data. Now, this is already happening in other fields like in HR, where automated computer administered video interviews can assess applicants using algorithms that are used to pre screen job candidates and then provide an automated report to an HR manager with who the most likely candidates for a human interview should be. And I want to emphasize this isn't science fiction or it's even something that's far off in the future. It's actually happening today. It's working technology that's already in use. It's also available to qualitative researchers, and I think it's quite likely we'll see something similar coming more forcefully to the realm of qualitative interviewing down the road, particularly as speech synthesis software and virtual avatars become more and more human-like, and the discomfort of talking to a computer lessens. But even if a computer-administered interview can collect, record, and transcribe virtual or verbal data, it's still very hard to use that technology on other approaches like product testing, taste testing, observational research, ethnography, or focus groups. There's also going to be a concern that computer-administered interviews tend to get less reliable information because people are more willing to lie to computers than other human beings. And so it's more likely, I suspect, that these sorts of automated methods will be used to pre-screen research participants to get them ready for the actual research, and perhaps function as pre-survey processes rather than the actual fieldwork process. Think of it like being like a video booth on a reality show. The real qualitative research happens when people are together, but the participants can also slip into a video booth and share information with the computer algorithm to explore their own personal reactions or feelings to what's going on. Another key word, by the way, is iteration, which is where qualitative research can be adjusted or changed on the fly as it turns out things aren't working as planned. And again, I want to specify, this is not science fiction. It's already possible. In fact, I've done it myself. I can keep a chat window open with a client during a focus group or interview, and I can even set up my interviewer moderator's guide to be a shareable document so they can insert questions or make changes as we go. They can change the research on the fly, and this allows the research field worker to have a collaborative dialogue with the research team to ensure that important information is collected and drilled down upon in real time. It also means that researchers may have to get used to more loosely structured approaches in their initial interviews or groups, and then perhaps to standardize things in a later phase. So the goal in all of this is cheaper, faster, better overall research, and the tools to get us there already exist. It's just up to qualitative researchers to find ways to utilize them and develop best practices for them. One area where best practices need to develop as soon as possible are in research involving mobile phones or tablets. Many qualitative researchers are still having conversations about how best to utilize these ubiquitous devices, but the fragmentation of platforms and the lack of good, reliable solutions built for the purposes of qualitative research means a lot of duct tape solutions are still being employed. But the promise is there. With a mobile smartphone, you can very easily conduct a digital ethnography or a digital diary study without ever needing to meet your participant in person, which allows you to open up to the entire world if you want to. You can display stimuli, and you can also watch interactions with real life things that you want to test, from products to interfaces to lines of argument if you want to. You can even do taste tests, provided that what you're testing can be pre-prepared and doesn't require any cooking. The options are definitely there. And I suspect mobile phone research is one area where we'll see some major movement in the next few years. Now, thanks to COVID-19, many people are now quite comfortable with webcam research, and interviewing people in their homes instead of at a research facility is not only feasible, but even preferential for many participants. And this is a major change. The days of telephone focus groups and perhaps even telephone interviews are rapidly shifting to video interviews and webcam focus groups. Once again, however, the research community is still adjusting to this change and has not yet instituted a strong set of best practices. And there are some very real ethical and privacy concerns that need to be addressed in the near future, including how these data are shown to end users. There are also many technological hurdles to clear, particularly in lower income communities where not everyone has access to the technology needed to do these kinds of applications. Even so, I expect that many of the traditional methods of interviewing will ultimately be supplanted by virtual webcam-based approaches in the next decade because it's so much cheaper and easier for everyone involved. In the end, my prediction is that a lot of where we're headed is going to be in the same direction we've seen quantitative research go over the last few decades. The cheaper, quicker, and easier an approach is, the more widely it's going to be used for marketing research. The unfortunate byproduct of this emphasis will be that there'll be a tendency to favor quick service solutions rather than deep and detailed methods that require spending a lot more time using robust approaches with lengthy analytic processes like grounded theory, for example. Fast food is pleasing, it's cheap, and it's easy, but it's rarely healthy, and it's often not as satisfying as having a better meal. But the appetites for fast food are less about taste or quality and more about meeting a need as quickly, cheaply, and conveniently as possible. Quantitative research has already become the fast food approach of research in many ways, and I suspect Qual's destiny is to become more like fast casual dining. It's not going to be Taco Bell, but it could easily become Chipotle or Qdoba. And I suspect that while the sit-down dining experience isn't going anywhere either, I mean, who wouldn't love to head out and enjoy some bottomless chips and salsa while drinking margarita specials with some friends, right? It's probably going to be something that's less about the mass market and more about serving those who are looking for a more specialized approach to qualitative research. In other words, it's going to be something that's in the domain of the full-service boutique suppliers, like the one that I work for, more than it's going to be in the realm of the large companies that are looking for scalable insights. With all that said, in our next lecture, we'll move on to discuss some emerging methods in qualitative research.